Hey, welcome to the conversation that's as diverse as the dogs that we adore. This is Gun Dogs and Guard Dogs, the ultimate podcast dedicated to talking sense about dogs, with Les Graham and Ross McCarthy. They work with all breeds of dog, but one specialises in gun dogs and the other prefers guard dogs. No flashy trends or social media hype here, just tried and true knowledge that stands the test of time. They bring you valuable insights and honest conversations about the social predator you share your home with. So here we go. About 45 minutes of gun dogs, guard dogs, good dogs, some maybe not so good dogs, and a dash of gossip.
Hello, I am delighted to say, Les, that we are joined again by Dr Lise Hansen from alternative-vet.co.uk, who is here today to talk about neutering in dogs. Welcome, Lise.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me back.
Thank you for coming. It's a pleasure.
It's so good to have you back. We've both been really looking forward to this.
Me too.
Shall we start at the beginning, which seems like a logical place to start? What is neutering in male and females?
Yeah, that's absolutely the place to start. I mean, neutering is desexing. So what we traditionally mean by neutering is a surgical neutering, where in females we remove the ovaries and in males we remove the testicles so that they become infertile. And I mean, if we start at the beginning and talk about neutering, I think the really important point to appreciate, and the really, to me, fascinating point, is that until 13, 14 years ago, nobody spoke about neutering. It was just something that we either did or didn't do, based entirely, it seems, on where we happen to live. And you know, where in the world we were keeping dogs. And it's one of many topics where once you become aware of it, it's hard not to think, why did I never think about this before? You know, there are so many things that we just do because that's what we do, and we don't think about it until someone points out that, you know, why are you doing this? This is a strange thing to be doing. The situation, if we go back, in 2012, if you lived in America, everybody, like absolutely everybody, would neuter their dogs. And the mantra over there was, responsible pet ownership means you must spay and neuter your dogs. That was just what you did. And you were a complete maniac if you didn't, or, you know, an irresponsible bully. Sensible people neutered their dogs. That was the state of affairs in America just over 10 years ago. In Norway, Sweden, you know, Scandinavia, nobody neutered their dogs, like absolutely nobody. But in neither of those places was it an issue or a topic or something that was up for discussion. It was just how things were. In Norway, neutering is illegal and has been illegal forever, as far as I understand. So, you know, no dogs are neutered. In Sweden, it's not illegal, but it's considered completely unethical and unnecessary. So again, it's not something you do. So if you live in Scandinavia, very high, you know, 90, whatever really high number dogs are entire. They're only neutered if there's been a physical, you know, if they had testicular cancer or whatever. If there was a medical reason to neuter, they might have been neutered, but it was not something that was done routinely at all. And in America, it was done to everybody. And those two states just coexisted and nobody questioned it. And I find that really fascinating in itself, you know, how this is not clearly about anything to do with medical. I mean, there's no reason. Dogs in Scandinavia and dogs in America, you know, they have the same ovaries and the same testicles, but we just dealt with it really differently. And it was not something that I don't think anyone noticed, to be honest.
Can I ask, can dogs roam in Scandinavia? Can they roam free? Because, you know, there's a lot of dogs roaming in the States. Do they, over here, with you can't, dogs aren't allowed to roam?
Yeah, I don't know anything about keeping dogs in the States, though I imagine, most people living in urban environments wouldn't just let their dogs out the way we did, I don't know, in Europe 50 years ago, but I don't know. But depends. I mean, no, nobody would just open their door and let their dogs roam free. But obviously, dogs go to parks and people walk them, and they run free on the beach and in the forest and in dog parks. So they're off the lead every day, I should hope, but accompanied and supervised, very much the same way they are in the UK. The way dogs are kept in the UK and the way dogs are kept in Scandinavia, it's the same. The neutering statistics in the UK are sort of a halfway house. In Scandinavia, nobody does it, or in parts of Scandinavia, absolutely nobody neuters. In America, everybody neuters. In the UK, it's more than half, but it's still not unheard of. I mean, I think the latest figures I saw was about 70% of female dogs are neutered in the UK, slightly fewer for male dogs, but it's around that. So about 30% are entire and always have been.
I wonder where
so
that came from, Lise, because like you said, years ago, I've never neutered my dogs, and people used to look at you like with shock that like how irresponsible you would be not to neuter. It was a blanket. Your vet would just say, you need, when the dog's 6 months old, that's when we'll castrate it. So I wonder why that.
I think it was completely random. I mean, this is kind of just setting the stage, right? Because you said let's go back to beginning, and I think that's exactly the right place to start this conversation. And my point is, it was random. It was habit. It was whatever was the done thing wherever you were. I mean, in the UK, historically, about 30% were not neutered. So some places it wasn't done, and some places it was. So the UK is kind of in the middle. But my main point is that we didn't consider it. It was just something that we, from cultural habit, either did or didn't do. And if you lived in a place where some did, some didn't, it was probably, well, that's what we've always done in my family, or that, that's what I've, it was kind of the sort of decision that was made without most of us even considering it. It was one of those decisions that we make without being aware that we are making one, because we just do what we've always done.
I think it was cited as well that it was beneficial health-wise for your dog, wasn't it?
Yeah, we used to think that. Yeah, we used to think that. There was an old study, I can't remember from the 50s or the 60s, but it was a very old study that was said to show that female dogs, certainly, who were neutered fairly early, had a lower risk of mammary cancer, breast cancer. That has now been completely discredited. It was a study that, it was what all vets used to say. I'm not going to cite the figures here because they were wrong, but it's what I always heard and always quoted and heard everybody else say. So that was what we said. And then when we had these new insights, someone went back and looked at, well, where did that assumption come from? And it came from one study from about 1960 that seemed to show this, and that if it had been submitted for publishing today, would have been absolutely rejected. This was the standard of 1960. There were too few numbers. They made conclusions that they couldn't. It would absolutely not stand up to the level that is expected today. So on very, very thin evidence that has turned out to be not reliable, that's what everyone's been saying forever. But it's kind of going back to the point from before that we just kind of did and said what we did and said without paying any attention to it. And then what happened, the real kind of line in the sand, the before and after moment, was a study that was published by a American university in 2013, a study that's often called the Golden Retriever study, where they looked at lifetime health data of 700 and something Golden Retrievers. And it's not important that it was Golden Retrievers, they just had a uniform group of dogs, and they wanted to look at the factors that significantly influenced their health and longevity. And what that study showed for the first time very, very clearly, to everyone's absolute shock, was that the dogs that were neutered were considerably less healthy. male and female. And specifically, they suffered from some forms of cancer, from ligament disease, particularly cruciate ligament disease, and from osteoarthritis. And that was the first time that was brought up, and I remember it's one of those I remember where I remember the chair I was in when I read that paper and thought, what the, surely not. And that, I think that was, across the veterinary community, that was the reaction to that. And that was in 2013. So that's 13 years ago now. And then came an absolute frenzy of veterinary researchers, everywhere, just thinking, what can this really be? And everybody, I mean, there was a point there in 16, 17, 18 that it seemed like every week there was a fresh paper comparing Labradors in Norway to Labradors in America, or, Alsatians, or looking at particular breeds, particular diseases. And for the list of ailments that neutered dogs had a far higher risk of suffering from just grew. Like it wasn't just cancer and ligament disease and arthritis. It turned out to be cystitis, thyroid issues, allergies, autoimmune disease, almost anything someone chose to look at and compare neutered versus not neutered. Turned out that, the neutered dogs were far more ill. And it was shocking. So from that period before, where it was just something we did or didn't do, and nobody gave it a second thought, to the shock in 2013, followed a good decade of shit, we need to know more about this, and all this just crazy amount of papers coming out. And there was a while there, sort of pre-COVID, if you went to a veterinary congress, this was the topic. There would be a panel discussion, but how do we deal with this? And vets just being quite, I don't know, just trying to take this information in, and what do we do now? And should, what should we do? And so there was a good decade where I suppose you could summarize the sort of state of affairs as being, neutering is not quite as harmless as we used to think. We're not quite sure what to do now. And then that period ended, or that phase ended, pretty exactly 2 years ago. The end of May 2024, the World Small Animal Veterinary Association published the first ever professional guidelines on, I think they call it control of reproduction in dogs and cats, where they had asked the world's leading experts in reproduction, professors at universities around the world who specialize in this topic, to review all the evidence, look at all the articles, all the studies, and tell vets everywhere, how should we respond to this? How should we proceed from here? And that document is absolutely the line in the sand that says we shouldn't neuter dogs. It's too dangerous. It's not in their health interest. And it's, it's harmful in a million ways, and it shouldn't be. It shouldn't. I think shouldn't do it anymore.
The message that's dripped down to lots of veterinary practices and to the public, I guess, is that we should not be neutering in young dogs. So we wait until they reach maturity, where depending on breed and gender, whether that's 18 months or 3 years in some breeds. I think that's the message that people have got. We don't neuter early, but we do it at an appropriate time, but we still do it.
Yeah, and that is exactly. We were just talking about fake news and the risk of misinformation being spread just before we went live, and that's exactly it. And that's the biggest problem in this situation, that the real message is getting lost, and it's. I don't know what it is, actually. I don't know if it's just too big a leap to go. I mean, this is particularly the message. It's certainly my impression that this is particularly the message in the US, where, because of their long tradition of insisting that everybody must be neutered, they don't know what to do now. It's a big turnaround to go from saying you absolutely must neuter every single dog to saying, actually we were wrong. This was I think that's the honest and I mean that's what we have to say. This is what we thought. New evidence came out. We were wrong. We now know better. I think that's the only approach to this. But there's a struggle going on, let's put it that way. And the message is being modified in two ways. One is, instead of honestly, taking in what the experts report, which is now nearly 2 years old, says, which is don't neuter. It does not say don't neuter young. It says don't neuter. But out there, it seems to be modified in two ways for those who find that's just too big a turnaround to grasp. It's like I need to take this in small bites. So it's being, I don't know what the word is. It's being
kind of introduced in stages, isn't it? Let's
yeah,
get
but
everybody
it's
to wait until the dogs are
being
mature
kind
and
of deformed, and there's a word, I can't think of it now, but it's being changed wrongly into don't neuter young or neuter by different techniques. In America, what they're saying is there are other surgical methods whereby the dogs become infertile, but they retain their sexual hormones. In males, it's a vasectomy. Much like men who, get the snip because they don't want kids or they don't want any more kids, you can do exactly the same thing to a male dog. And that's now being pushed as an alternative form of neutering. And for females, there's what's sometimes called the ovary-sparing spay. Technically, it's a hysterectomy where you take away the womb, but you leave the ovaries. So those are two alternative surgical procedures that leave the animal infertile but hormonally intact. And I think that there will be few situations where they have a role to play, but mostly, in almost all situations, I think you're putting your dog through unnecessary surgery because you can't leave them to roam and mate anyway. I mean, maybe if it's a neuter and release program for Indian street dogs or something, sure, like you do with cats. But for owned dogs who are supervised and kept in, urban environments and by responsible dog carers, you're not going to give your male dog a vasectomy and let him run around and mate whenever he wants. I mean, that would result in injury and fights and all sorts of problems. So you need to have your dog under control, obviously. So I can't see that a vasectomy really solves much. It could even give that false sense of security. Oh, it doesn't matter if he ran off and followed a female in heat because he's not fertile. I don't think that female's owner is going to be very happy with
no.
So I think it's at worst a false sense of security, at best absolutely pointless surgery, which, as any surgery, involves a risk and just doesn't really seem to do very much. In males, it's a very small procedure. In females, an ovary-sparing spay is a huge procedure. It's actually bigger than the old-fashioned traditional spay. And I can see very few situations where it benefits the dog who goes through it. It would be maybe, I can think of a situation where if you got a dog from a shelter, where you signed something saying that you have, there are some old-fashioned rules in place still in places. And I think if you have a shelter that insists on neutering, I don't think you should get a dog from them, because we need to speed up this process of everybody becoming better informed. But if you have got a dog and you've signed something where you are legally obliged to have that dog neutered, I would still question that. But maybe there's a situation where that could be the answer. An ovary-sparing spay, you can put the female dog through a huge piece of surgery, but not actually hormonally neuter her. So there may be the odd situation where it has a role to play. But just to go back to your point, Ross, from a very long argument, I know, I think the main message of don't neuter, the follow-on from that should be, let's keep our dogs intact. It's the natural state. What were we thinking? But instead, it's being subverted into don't neuter young or neuter by different techniques. And I think those two I think they are problematic. That's certainly not the whole truth, and it shouldn't be the go-to. There was a veterinary meeting recently where in the UK there is now a new test made available, which they call neuter ready, because you can't say the age at which a dog, a male, this is for male dogs, and because you can't really tell when each male dog is sexually mature. Some are at 6 months, some may have to be at 2 years. And so they made this product that tests whether the dog is sexually mature enough. And the aim of it is that you can then wait and only neuter when they're sexually mature. And I think it's a New Zealand or Australian company that's made this test, and they were being hugely criticized by vets, saying, but you're implying then that we should wait till sexual maturity and then test and then neuter, and that's the new way
New
to
regime.
go.
Yeah.
And it absolutely shouldn't be. But they were saying, yes, but we're just making a tool available. We're not saying people should use it, and we're not saying you shouldn't leave them intact. But I think for some vets in practice who may not be in control of their own message, or who may just be too busy to read up on this properly, the assumption could easily become, okay, now we don't neuter young anymore. We do this test and then we neuter when they're ready. And that is not the professional advice. It's not. There's no science base for that.
Can I ask you though, because the dog could become sexually mature while the growth plates are still open, couldn't they? So you could end up in that instance neutering a male dog while his growth plates are still open and physically he's still grown, but sexually, like he could be sexually mature, but everything could still be open and growing. I'm thinking of like
I think the assumption is that the growth plates close, that those two things are connected.
Okay.
But again, I think it's kind of the wrong conversation to be having, because we shouldn't neuter.
No. And
sexually mature or not.
Going back to what you were saying about the habit, like the RSPCA still recommend, and I just checked, I mean, it was about 10 years ago they were recommending that puppies were being neutered before they left the litter. I don't know if you can remember that, Ross. That was quite a while ago now. And now they've now changed it to that the males need to be more than 7 months old, but they're still very much, the shelters and the RSPCA definitely are pushing forward to still neuter quite young. Like we wouldn't even consider doing anything under a year, but the RSPCA are still saying 7 months. Get the bitch through the first season. How do we battle these massive organizations, and because people will come back to you and say, oh, well, the RSPCA say this, or I've got my dog from one of the big rescue centres and they're saying this, and it's like trying to push back and finding the information, which is why like we're both really grateful for you to come and talk to us about it, so we've got something to push back with.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, the RSPCA has a lot to answer for. I'm sure it came from a good place originally, but they have a lot to answer for.
They do.
It's important to mention, I mean, I mentioned the World Small Animal Veterinary Association guidelines that came out at the end of May 2024, and that's the go-to resource. Those are the world veterinary experts speaking.
WSAVA.
Yeah, exactly. And they're available online, WSAVA.org. It's obviously it's a document written for vets, but it's if you ever in a situation where someone hasn't heard or someone questions, or that's the go-to document, and it's very, very clear. But I should also say that the BVA and the BSAVA, the British Veterinary Association and the British Small Animal Veterinary Association, reviewed their guidelines a couple of months ago. I mean, this is all happening, and this is why you have this conflicting, what seems like conflicting information or conflicting advice, because it's new and we are very much in a period of transition. And the first study may have come out in 2013, but the document, the jury came, the jury's only been in since 2024. And that's not a long time in terms of breaking decades and decades of habit, for lack of a better word. But the British Veterinary Association released a new policy statement a couple of months ago, And what they're saying in that is that since we last reviewed this topic in 2019, a lot of new information has become available, so we need to do a new statement. And it's an interesting one because they're listing, they're certainly saying that no vet should neuter. They're kind of a bit, they're not particularly, well, I mean, they're clear if you read between the lines, but they're sort of trying to please everybody. But what it boils down to is they're listing all the new information and how harmful it is, and the methods by which we now believe this harm is happening. And they're saying that no vet should automatically neuter a healthy dog anymore, and that they should always make sure that they sit down with the owner and make them aware of all the risks, including alternatives to neutering. So they're actually saying that before they neuter, you need to tell the owner this increases the risk of cancer, arthritis, etc., 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 and that there are other surgical procedures, and that there is chemical options as well that we haven't talked about yet. And then that the other side of the argument in the British Veterinary Association recent paper is, I think they call it societal expectations. Which I find really interesting. So they're saying, yes, we know that this harms the dogs, but, and the only thing, I mean, what do they mean by societal expectations? They clearly mean that this is what people expect. This is what people are used to. We can't just suddenly say something different. And then the argument becomes population control, that we have to limit unwanted puppies. And that's the only argument. I mean, that's the only other argument. And what that argument really says is, yes, we know that the individual dog is harmed, but it can't be helped, because otherwise the streets would be flooded with a tsunami of homeless puppies. And I find that really hard to believe. I mean, I don't see dogs running around. I just don't see stray dogs in the UK.
It's against the law. It's against the law to leave a stray dog. Yeah.
So what is this belief that people somehow can't stop that? I mean, it's a cultural. I don't know. It's a completely unfounded fear, if you ask me. But why would we think that we couldn't stop dogs breeding? I mean,
it's changing the collective consciousness, isn't it? But that takes such a long time to do, and especially, I think, in relation to collective consciousness, I think it was much easier to change when we didn't have all of this information from so many different places. Whereas when we went back to, say, for example, when we had 4 TV channels, there was this really common collective consciousness because everybody saw the same thing, heard the same thing, was aware of the same thing. Now we've got social media and influencers telling us one thing. You've got ChatGPT, and everybody's ChatGPT is individual to their own beliefs anyway. So if I believe you shouldn't be castrating and neutering and somebody else believes you could, and I ask ChatGPT a question, my answer will be very different to somebody else's. And so I think because we've got so many different bits of information coming from so many different places, it's going to be so difficult to change that collective consciousness. I don't know how it's going to happen. I mean, it needs to happen, but I don't know how it's going to happen.
A real societal shift, won't it? Because talking about neutering, I mean, I think, like you said, about the sort of street dogs in India and things, they should have a neuter program so that they stop all of this horrific nonsense that goes on across some of these countries. But in the UK, like, all of the welfare charities are obsessed with neutering. We've got to have it neutered now. You know, whether the bitch is in season or not doesn't matter. Let's neuter her. And to change that will be, I mean, I've had entire dogs for 30 odd years. I've never had a litter. You know, it's
exactly. I've never had a neutered dog. I've had litters, but they were very intentional. You know, it's I mean, that's why we're here, because we have to change things, because it's a little bit crazy. And I mean, Les, I completely agree. It's what we were saying just before we went online, because I came on all riled up because I just heard someone who ought to know better say utter rubbish, you know, for likes, I think. I don't know. But it's important to say that it's not differing opinions. It's not a matter of opinion. We used to do different things completely randomly based on habit and geographical, you know, just whatever. And based on, there were no professional veterinary considerations behind what they did in Norway or in the States. It was just kind of how the dice fell. But since 2024, we now know this is where the science is at today. We know that when an individual dog is neutered, that dog's health suffers. End of. Nobody can argue that. This is what we know at this point. It's been absolutely established. But the problem is that it's new, and shifts, like you were saying, they take time. And there is this, I'm not even sure it's conscious, but there is this seemingly this effort at the moment to try to kind of divert the debate and say don't neuter early or neuter differently, because the truth is sort of too big somehow.
The thing is,
end that at don't neuter.
It's common sense, though, isn't it? It doesn't make sense that neutering the natural state of an animal would improve health. How would that? I mean, just without science, how do you think removing hormones are gonna, and putting the dog through surgery, how is that going to improve health?
But I don't think it's. I think the stuff that's coming down from generations, if you like, like when I was younger, it was always you neuter your bitch after the first season, and so if I hadn't have gotten involved with dogs, then that would be my reasoning, because that's what I was told to do with my dog. And I think a lot of it is still that as well. It's getting away from. It's not necessarily common sense. It's just what was drummed into us as we were growing up, and hopefully
that's
exactly
the
next generation.
My point. Yeah. It's those decisions that we make without even being conscious of them.
Yeah.
That's just what we do.
What we do.
Most of us, we don't even think about it. Dogs eat dog food. Sure they do. And you may yourself eat healthily and be aware of not eating ultra-processed and all that stuff, but surely dogs need dog food. Otherwise it wouldn't be called dog food. And that's what we've always done. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And there's all these decisions, and it's somehow become my mission in recent years to try and just shine the light on some of these decisions. And we were talking last time, we spoke about vaccination. Now we're talking about neutering. We can talk about parasites. We can talk about diet. There are decisions that every single dog carer makes about their animal, even if they're completely healthy. And it's important that we make those decisions properly. Can I share a quote? One of my absolute heroes is a vet, he's sadly not with us anymore, Professor Michael Day, who was the chair of the World Small Animal Veterinary Association Vaccine Expert Group, who wrote the first vaccination guidelines. And he said in an article in a veterinary magazine in 2017, he said a sentence that if it wasn't so long, I would want this tattooed somewhere on my body. But he was arguing to vets about why we really shouldn't continue to vaccinate the way most vets were, but why we need to look at it from a veterinary professional scientific point of view and, go back to scratch and vaccinate according to science. And he said it about vaccines, but it absolutely applies to neutering as well. It applies to all these topics. He said, delivery of fundamental veterinary practices should be based in the latest scientific thinking rather than historical anecdote.
Perfect.
And historical anecdote is exactly why we neuter dogs, and why we are so threatened by the idea of just not neutering dogs. Because that's what we've always done and what we've always heard and what we thought, just like you were saying. But we can't rationally continue to act according to a historical anecdote once the evidence is there, and we should know better.
It's weird. Can I ask, before we talk, I think you mentioned about chemical implants, but just while we're on this, pyometra is something that gets mentioned quite a lot as you have to neuter your bitch in case she gets pyometra. What is pyometra, and
pyometra? Pyometra is it's a infection of the womb, which generally leads to a sort of a pustulant, smelly discharge from the vulva. A discharge from the vulva outside of her season should always warrant a visit to the vet, because that's a sign of a womb infection. It's what we call a disease with high morbidity but low mortality. So in entire female dogs, it's not uncommon. It's treatable. And they almost never die from it these days. That wasn't necessary. I think some people have a fear of pyometra because they remember a childhood dog maybe that died of pyometra 20, 30 years ago. And certainly when I qualified as the vet a very long time ago, when you were on the first kind of weekends you were on call on your own, that was the big fear, to get a dog in with a pyometra that you have to operate on your own on a Sunday night. And, you know, it used to be a potentially quite dangerous disease. It isn't really that anymore. For lots of reasons, I think mainly that it's much easier to diagnose these days. Every veterinary clinic can run bloods in-house, and they can very quickly tell if there's an infection in a dog that wasn't available 30 years ago. If you took a blood sample, you have to send it to a lab and, you know, wait a week for the results. So every vet can check very quickly if this dog is suffering from an infection. And most veterinary clinics also have an ultrasound machine now, so they can very, very quickly visualize the uterus and see if there's an infection. And we also have better ways of treating pyometra now. It used to be that if there was a pyo, it was almost always discovered quite late, which means that, you know, it was an emergency and the dog was really, really ill, and you then had to operate on them. These days, as I just mentioned, it's generally discovered much earlier because it's much easier to detect, and we now very often treat that with drugs rather than surgery, and they recover and they're fine. I saw some statistics recently. Oh, I should not try to quote. I should have dug out the figures, but it was something in the area of, they were looking at treatment options for pyometra. It was the university had an evening about this and the best way to treat it, and they were sharing some statistics on how most cases are treated with drugs, and then a few cases, or more serious cases, are treated surgically. And it was something like, of those that were operated on, which would be the worst cases, the worst affected cases, it was something like 98 or 99% survived. So that's just to say, out of the most serious cases, I mean, they really all survive. I mean, the risk of the dog dying of pyometra in 2026, if you have an observant owner who goes to the vet if there's a discharge, or if the dog just generally feels it, seems ill. I mean, if you don't treat it, they become very ill, but you'd notice, and you'd go to the vet and they would diagnose it quite quickly and they would treat it quite easily. Just to say, it's just another example that fear is not a good base for sound decisions. No. Or you could turn that around and say, I mean, appendicitis is quite common in humans. Why don't we remove everyone's appendix? Because that solves that. It's a bizarre reasoning to take away a healthy organ for fear that it should become ill at some point in the future.
What's the difference between open and closed pyometra?
And the most common form is the open pyometra, which is when you see the pussy discharge. Yeah, a closed pyometra is when you have the infection, but the cervix is closed, so the discharge doesn't go anywhere, so it's harder to see. Yeah. And they get more ill more quickly.
Yeah, because it's not draining out of the body, is it?
It's not draining out of the body, exactly. But you would see, but it's not that a seemingly healthy female dog would be walking around with a closed pyometra. She would be feeling seriously unwell. And if you know your dog at all, you would become concerned quite quickly that my dog is not well, and then hopefully go to the vet.
Can I ask on anecdotal, or the stuff that comes down through the generations? So dogs that are most, you can say that's rubbish, please do say that's rubbish. Okay, so dogs that are more susceptible to pyometra are the dogs that have very dramatic phantom pregnancies.
I'm glad you mentioned that. That's another very commonly heard fallacy. No,
Okay,
there is
great. 'Cause
no connection. There is absolutely
fantastic.
no connection between false. I asked, I can't remember his name now, years ago. I asked the president of the European reproduction specialists this, and he said the only connection between female dogs that have false pregnancies and female dogs that have pyometra is that they are entire. You know, there are no other. I mean, it's
Okay.
not. They're not connected at all. No, but it's good that you mention it because it's one that's commonly
Because
heard.
I thought that as well, you know, because I know like a lot of bitches will go through the whole mothering thing after a season, and that's really common. But then some of them are like really, really over the top with it, and I like that. I was always thought that it was the ones that were very dramatic with their phantom pregnancies were the ones that you had to really watch for.
And you can hear that out there for sure. I mean, it is
Yeah, yeah,
it's one of the myths that you hear, but it's I have
it's
it
a
from
myth.
highest authority that it's authority that it's not the case.
Do you
No.
do you think that there are any behavioral or sort of psychological issues that we should be considering neutering for? I mean, obviously that years ago that was you'd get your male dog if it displayed any aggression, get it neutered,
Mhm.
um, which obviously has the reverse effect in lots of cases and compounding it. But do you think there are any reasons, like if a bitch, you know, after every season she has, you know, seemingly kind of a terrible time with her hormones or whatever, do you think there are reasons sometimes to do that?
I don't, but it's one of the ones that you can hear cited. I don't know if we've got time to go into the whole thing of false pregnancies because it's a really
Mm.
interesting area. It's often talked about as if it was a disease or a syndrome,
Mhm.
but what we often refer to as false pregnancy is that period for about 2 months following an intact female dog has been in season, and it is vets call it metaestrus. It is the phase that all intact female dogs go through. It's the phase that is what characterizes that phase is that it's dominated by the hormone progesterone, and progesterone makes you feel in a certain way, and I mean I can go on about this. Stop me if you think, but I'm going off topic now, and I don't want to turn it into a secondary school biology lesson or a kind of, I don't know, gender politic, but I mean I think it's really fascinating when I mean there are lots of similarities between, I mean we're mammals, you know, there's a lot of similarities
Absolutely.
between a female human and a female dog,
Uh-huh.
um and I mean when I was young this was not something we were aware of. I've seen younger women today, very much. I mean, if you look at TikTok and young people's TikToks, they're very often very aware of
The different
what their
phases.
hormones are today, you know,
Yeah.
and why they feel the way they feel. And I've seen it described as this wheel of seasons where young women talk about spring, summer, autumn, winter,
Mhm.
depending on whether estrogen or progesterone is the predominant sexual hormone. And
Mhm.
estrogen makes you want to, really makes you want to go out and get pregnant. But the way that feels is it makes you want to be extrovert. It makes you
Yeah.
want to go out and
Find a
um,
mate.
yeah,
Yeah.
or you know, go dancing or talking, or you know, once you it makes you feel that you want to go out and be active and extrovert and have things happen. Whereas progesterone, I mean, progesterone, it means for pregnancy. You know, it's the hormone that makes you want to be looking after young. It makes you feel like I want to stay home, I want to cuddle, I want to be
Uplifting.
calm, I want to be, you know, snuggling with somebody. I want to, this is where it's where you
Mm.
might want Netflix and a blanket and a candle and some chocolate or something. That's the progesterone speaking.
Mhm.
And whereas a woman has a 28-day cycle, a dog has a 6-month cycle, but there are some other really striking differences. When a woman ovulates, the follicle where the egg comes from turns into the, I mean, this is where the secondary biology lesson comes in, secondary school biology lesson.
Yeah, go for it.
The follicle where the egg that made the egg then turns into the corpus luteum that then produces progesterone, and that remains if she falls pregnant. But if she doesn't, it quickly deteriorates. Everything is flushed away.
Period.
She
Yeah.
comes into period, and you start over. But in a dog, that system is set very differently. All female dogs after ovulation, which of course happens during the heat, meaning the heat is not the same as a period in a woman. It's kind of the opposite time that we bleed. But when the eggs are made in the follicles turn into the corpus luteum that produce progesterone, and they continue to do so for 2 months, whether or not she's pregnant. So the
kind of the
hormones,
gestation period.
exactly. So the hormones, I mean, she is pregnant hormonally, physically, mentally, emotionally, in every way. If you take a blood test, she is pregnant. It's just that if she wasn't mated, there's no puppies. But she's pregnant. You know, she thinks she's pregnant. She feels pregnant. Her hormones tell her that she's pregnant, whether or not she's got puppies in her womb. And I find that fascinating.
Oh, it's amazing. God, the bodies are amazing.
Yeah, isn't it just? And it's believed to be because wild dogs would live in groups, and they would hunt together to eat. And if they were all mated, there would be no one to catch who would hunt and who would feed all these pups and the whole group of dogs. So presumably only one female dog typically would be mated, and it is then, one would assume, helpful for the group, partly that if something happens to her, there are wet nurses to take over. All the other dogs are hormonally geared. Most dogs in that phase of their cycle will have a little bit of milk. If you can get a little bit of milk out, and certainly if someone were to suckle, they would be completely lactating within hours. So they are hormonally prepared to mother, to take over. Yeah. And also I'm guessing that if they were not in that progesterone state and there were suddenly irritating little puppies all over the place that weren't their own, they'd probably just kill them. Or not be very forgiving. But the fact that all the females in that group are motherly, because that's what their hormones tell them to do. They think little furry things are cute, and they can make milk. If they all
come into season at the same time, don't they? If you've got a kennel full of bitches,
they very often do. Yeah,
all of the rest
mammals tend to. I mean, women as well. If you work in an office with other women, women tend to synchronize. Mammals tend to synchronize. So nature has set this up so that in a group of dogs, when there are puppies, all the females in that group are physically and mentally and emotionally ready to care for those puppies. But what that means now is that female dogs, after their season, feel pregnant. And just like women who are pregnant, just like anybody who's under the influence of progesterone, that affects you. You become more tired, you become more inward looking, more emotional, more sort of emotionally needy, maybe. Some
very clingy.
Clingy, exactly. Some get nausea. Some want to eat more because they feel like they're eating for more than one, and some eat less because they're nauseated. And female dogs experience all of that. But the problem is, and this is where I get a little bit, I don't want to, I'll get off my soapbox, but I think part of the problem is that veterinary medicine, or medicine full stop, has been male driven.
Yeah.
And I mean, the word hysteria, that means womb. Hyster means womb. So if you're up and down, if you're not stable, that's sort of the description of, or the perception of, females. Yeah. Because males don't have a cycle. Males are, the male cycle goes like that. There isn't one. It's a completely straight line. But a healthy mammal female will go through a hormonal cycle that means that you don't feel the same every day. Some days you feel estrogen like, and some days you feel progesterone like, because that's what you're going through, and you're going to feel differently, but it's not unhealthy. It's just the natural cycles that you're going through. And somehow, certainly today, I think women, as I said before, are much more aware of this, and most people are more aware of this. You know, you feel differently just before your period or whatever. But in dogs, we've just overlooked this completely. And there's this tendency, if a dog after her season is more needy, doesn't really want to go and do a whole load of active training, would rather lie in front of the fire and have her belly rubbed. And, you know, if you can tell that she's not herself, instead of saying, oh, you know, I know that feeling, I'll lie down next to you and give you a kiss. A lot of us think, oh, there's something wrong with her. Take them to the vet, and the vet will say, oh, I know what this is. This is a false pregnancy. I can inject her, but well, not inject her actually, but I can give her some hormones, and that'll pass. And sure, it does, and it will. But I would certainly, when someone comes to me and says that, 20 years ago, I would have said, oh, we can treat this with hormones. I know what this is. When was her last season? You know, she's having a false pregnancy. But with a deeper understanding of what's going on, we could also choose to say, it's good that you brought your dog in today. Let's rule out pyometra, because that's one of the things that can happen at the same time of her cycle. And we just need to make sure that she's not actually unwell because of that. But having ruled that and any other disease, having ruled those out, it looks like she's having a false pregnancy. That's a completely normal phase. She'll be back to her old active self in a matter of weeks. Just, you know, go home and give her lots of kisses. And I think that's a more respectful way to approach that. But having said that, again, there are, of course, female dogs and women who are overly sensitive to normal hormonal fluctuations. There are women who need treatment for, you know, psychological and physical ailments due to normal. I mean, people get postpartum depressions, or when they get periods, they might get migraines, or, you know, all sorts of things. For some, it can be a stress factor that they are very sensitive to, and that's where my advice will maybe be different from lots of other vets, because some vets will still say that that's a reason to neuter if the female dog becomes clearly unwell. And some do, you know, but also, I mean, I'm also a homeopath, and humans and dogs with who are very sensitive to hormones respond beautifully to homeopathy. So I would absolutely say to anybody who has a dog that suffers unduly with false pregnancies, go see a veterinary homeopath. But in the vast majority of cases, it's just a matter of understanding what's going on. Because of course we're nervous if the dog that normally wants to go and run around for hours suddenly wants to lie in front of the fire. We should check that they're not ill. But understanding what's going on for them means that false pregnancy is not a disease. It's a natural hormonal phase that happens in all female dogs if they are entire.
No, that's great. And can we ask you about how, I know we're saying, you know, we shouldn't really be neutering, but can we ask how it's done? Because there's lots of different ways of neutering and castrating now, isn't there? So because I know, like, you wanted to ask about the mechanics of how it was done. I mean, I've seen horses getting castrated, which is very, very different. It used to be like 40 years ago, you know, very different. But it'd be, you know, it's something like we're both really interested in. What's the mechanics? And in
male dogs it's very simple. Sure. I mean, in male dogs it's very simple, and it's not a big surgical procedure. You just literally cut off the testicles, throw them in the bin, and that's done. I mean, it's going to be so interesting to see in the future, because we're just there now, where this is something that we talk about as if it's normal, and it has been normal, but in, you know, give it a few years, this doesn't happen anymore. I mean, the science is there. We're just right at the cusp of implementing it. So we're right at a turning point. But for males, what we used to do is just cut off the testicles, job done. There is also the chemical castration, which is a hormone implant. That comes in two versions, one that lasts 6 months and one that lasts 12 months. Those are not at all accurate. It's generally one that lasts at least 6 months and one that lasts at least 12 months. And it's important to mention that the chemical castration doesn't come with the side effects that surgical castration does. So if someone is in a situation where it's completely untenable, like if they have several male dogs or male and female dogs together, and they can't keep them all entire, then chemical castration of the male is the option that's still available to us, and it can be repeated as often as you like. So you just get the one that lasts a year, and before it runs out, you repeat it. So that's there as a fall safe.
Do we know, whilst we're on that subject, do we have any science or research on long-term effects of that injection, or is it a completely safe thing to do and we can just repeat it endlessly, or are there possible concerns about how that works?
I mean, we always have to be careful about saying that anything is completely safe, because who knows what's going to be, what's going to come to light in 5 years. Yeah. But at the moment, there is nothing to indicate that it isn't. And it is commonplace to give typically you start by giving the one that lasts 6 months, and then the big thing about it is that it's reversible. Of course, it gives you a chance to see what's this dog like without sex hormones, and if that seems to have solved whatever reason made you want to go that way, you would then typically give them a 12-month implant and then repeat it just before it runs out. And there's no evidence that should be harmful. The mechanism is very different from what happens is very different from the chemical castration. It just doesn't have the same. It doesn't have the same side effects.
How does it work? Do you know? Because it blocks sort of testosterone production, does it? And then like testicles naturally shrink. So
yeah, they go really tiny and they go hairless as well. Because I've done it just to get really detailed.
Let's talk about testicles.
Let's talk about testicles because
I don't have to go so animated with your hands, Les.
Yeah, sorry. Let's talk about
get those little It's true, oh God, I'm blushing now. So, because I did it with Emrys, because he was really, really bitching. He went through this phase as like, he would just scarify everything. He didn't even have to wee. He would just be like, oh, Emrys was here scratching everywhere. I can't remember what it's called. What's the implant called?
Suprelorin.
And so it was really interesting because he had quite large testes and hairy, really hairy. And then all of a sudden they had no hair on them and they shrank and they went from like peaches to grapes almost,
Yeah.
I know when I'm working with dogs and I say to people, when I would say if you did want to go down that castration route, go down the chemical castration first, so the dogs don't end up with floppy scrotums, at the end of it, because if you castrate a dog with big testes, it could end up with floppy scrotums. This is a really bad conversation. But
the hand sign for floppy scrotums as well.
Luckily, it's only, isn't it?
They have like really floppy scrotums at the end of it, don't they? Because they've had large testes removed, and so they have lots of floppy skin. So I would always say to people, go down the Suprelorin route, so that at least when the testes are removed, they don't have like big saggy scrotums after it.
I love that reasoning. I have never heard that before. I mean, I have always said if someone, prior to all this new knowledge, if someone was considering a castration, I've always said go for the chemical castration first, because it gives you a chance to see what your male dog is like when he's neutered, and then because then you can just not do it. And lots of people said, thank God we did that first. Yeah. That was awful. It does not suit him. He gained a lot of weight. He became a complete couch potato. We don't want that dog. So we're just going to let that run its course and then be happy when he comes back. But which obviously you can't do if you've neutered him surgically. So that's always been my reason for it. But of course, from today going forward, I mean, really from May 2024, but for right now, no, I mean, surgical castration of healthy dogs is no longer an option. it's irresponsible, it's dangerous, it's out. If he has a testicular tumor, sure. And there could also be, I mean, there are some testosterone related health issues. Those are generally solvable in other ways, but I mean, never say never. But when we talk about healthy dogs, it's out as an option. It's not available to us. So in those situations for male dogs, we have the chemical castration. Sorry, you were asking about how does it work, weren't you? And then we went all
scrotomy.
We did.
So just as you get on to how it works, so the testes are up in the abdomen and then they come down, don't they? Like when they're a certain age, it's like the old balls drop, don't they? So as they come down, but sometimes you can have one stuck up in the abdomen, can't you? And I had that with one of my golden retrievers. He only had one testy come down into the scrotum. And so, I mean, we're going back 2003, 2004. And so they said, just castrate them completely, remove both of the testes. But now, if that happened, would you just recommend removing the one that's stuck in the abdomen and keep... Actually,
the latest advice, and I think it's really important when we talk about these things to say that I'm not, I'm very much not saying kind of what I think. I'm trying to kind of pass on what the experts are saying. I'm not a reproduction expert. I'm just a vet who likes to be well informed. But the reproduction experts used to say that a dog that was cryptorchid, a cryptorchid dog doesn't have both testicles in the scrotum, should be neutered because there is an increased risk of cancer in the retained testicle. That turned out to be one of those things that's kind of true but irrelevant, because the risk of testicular cancer goes from, and I'm making this up, the numbers are not accurate, but it's something like 0.00000001 risk of testicular cancer to 0.000002. It goes from being unbelievably unlikely. It goes from being extremely unbelievably unlikely to just being extremely unlikely. So it's not a real risk in any case. So the advice today, generally speaking, when you talk to reproduction specialists, is we no longer recommend, there's no longer a blanket recommendation of neutering cryptorchid dogs. Also because now we know, I mean, that's actually been the case longer than this, but it's even more so now that we know all the other risks of neutering. So that's no longer the general advice. But if we talk about how it works, we probably need to also talk about, probably the groundwork for that is to mention the mechanism, because it seems a valid question to say, what has removing testicles got to do with cancer or osteoarthritis or allergies, or what's the link? And the current theory on that is that there is this, I mean, the body is just amazing. There is this very intricate balance going on between the brain and the sexual organs, where the hypothalamus in the brain releases a hormone that we call GnRH, gonadotropin releasing hormone, that tells the pituitary gland to produce hormones FSH and LH, and the important one here is LH, which stands for luteinizing hormone, which then tells the sex organs to step up. So the hypothalamus tells the pituitary gland to tell the testicles, if it's a male, to produce testosterone. And so it's like knocking on the door. It's saying, hey, testosterone levels are low in this body. It's your job to make testosterone wake up, get working. And then the testicles respond and they produce testosterone. And then when the blood level of testosterone goes up, there's a very clever negative feedback mechanism where the higher levels of testosterone tell the pituitary gland to slow down. So LH goes up, tells the testicles to make testosterone. Testosterone goes up, lowers LH. So that's how that body homeostasis, how that balance is kept. That testosterone is at the right physiological level through that feedback loop between the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, and the gonads, the sex organs. And when we then surgically castrate. We take a knife, we cut away the testicles. What happens is the pituitary gland keeps producing LH because it's saying, hello, we have no testosterone here. You need to make testosterone. Come on, come on, come on, come on. It's like knocking at a door where there's no one there because we cut off the testicles. So the response, the inhibitory response never comes. So LH levels just rise and rise and rise. They shout louder and louder and louder and louder. We need testosterone. Wake up, wake up. But no one answers. So the result of that is that in a neutered animal, and this goes for males and females, in a neutered animal, the LH levels can be 30, 40 times higher than they would ever be in a healthy, intact animals. And they're higher for life. And they're higher in all. This happens in every single dog that is neutered. You can go in and measure LH and it will be crazy high permanently because the body is trying to wake up the gonads, but we've cut them up, we cut them out. And we used to think that that didn't matter because we used to think that sex hormones was just about reproduction. But it's turned out in recent years that there are LH receptors everywhere throughout the body. In the brain, in blood cells, in the bladder wall, in hair follicles, in ligaments. The body is, tissues all through the body have receptors that bind to LH. And suddenly LH is 30 times higher than it would ever normally be. And that's what causes lymphoma or mast cell tumors or all these diseases. It also affects the brain. It changes behavior. That's the mechanism. That's why, or certainly at this point believed to be why, neutered dogs are so much more ill with diseases that on the face of it, you wouldn't think what has cancer of the blood got to do with not having testicles, but that's believed to be why this problem happens. And this is why when the hormone implant doesn't cause high LH level. On the contrary, actually, this is where it gets a bit complicated, but also fascinating, in that the Suprelorin implant, the active ingredient deslorin, is what's known as a GnRH agonist. An agonist is someone that does the same thing. So the hypothalamus releases GnRH that then binds to the pituitary gland to say, make LH. And the deslorin that is in the implant binds to those receptors in the pituitary gland so that they are not available. They're blocked. They don't respond to GnRH. So the hormone implant actually lowers LH, whereas surgical castration gives you crazy high LH levels always for life in any neutered animal. The implant, we call it castration, and the physical effect seems similar, but it actually does it not only through a different mechanism, through a mechanism that's in a way is opposite. And where it gets really crazy is that there is experimental work being done in the States at the moment trying to lower LH in neutered animals through this hormone implant, because that's what it does. It lowers LH. But this is experimental at the moment.
I mean, that is brilliant, because we know, like, when you neuter or when you spay, something's gone on straight away because they get like a dreadful coat. Their coats will just blow.
And that's because of LH receptors in the hair follicles.
Too much, isn't there? And so in that case, we haven't got the equivalent for bitches, have we? We haven't got a Suprelorin for bitches, even though.
No, we don't. It's not licensed for bitches, but it is. I mean, this is not something that anybody's local vet is going to be doing. But there are papers being published at the moment where they're using it on an experimental basis to actually, and also to bitches, that if you, because it turns out that a lot of neutered animals that are ill with allergies, autoimmune disease, cystitis, urinary stones, cancers.
All down to the LH.
It's such a huge
Yeah.
variety of syndromes, but they're all lumped together and called either spay and neuter syndrome, because the assumption is they wouldn't have suffered from that if they hadn't been neutered. And sometimes it's also called LH-induced disease. So what this means, and this is not general veterinary practice now, but it's where the research is happening, and it could be general practice in a year or two, is that if you say have a female dog who was fine and then she was neutered and now she's urinary incontinent, or she's got cancer, or she's got an allergy or whatever, is to say, well, we think this is LH driven, then to give her the chemical implant that you wouldn't give a female if she was entire, but in this case you're giving it to lower LH. So this is there's been papers published about this, but I mean this is of academic interest at the moment, but it's a strange roundabout thing, isn't it? That the implant that is generally used to chemically castrate intact males may have a role to play in saving the lives of female neutered dogs because it lowers LH. That's how it works.
And I mean, so many bitches suffer with incontinence after spaying. I mean, that would be such a relief for the owners if they could do that.
Yeah. And that's one of the, I mean, we've known about the hair changes and we've known about the incontinence for ages. Yeah. We just didn't quite understand why. But this is because of LH receptors in the bladder wall. But this is obviously this is relevant in a relatively short period, because this is only relevant to dogs that were neutered, that are ill now because they were neutered before we know better. Isn't it going to be interesting to see? I mean, now that we're not neutering anymore, this has stopped. I know that there are organizations and there are individual vets around the place who are still struggling to catch up, but the verdict is in. I mean, the WSAVA, the BVA, all the veterinary associations are saying this. From the individual dog's point of view, we cannot neuter anymore. The only argument for neutering would be to accept damage to the individual dog for reasons of population control and societal expectations. And I mean, come on, in a modern society where people control their dogs, those should not be relevant. But the jury is in. We can no longer neuter dogs. So what's going to happen in 10 years? I mean, dog generations are fairly short, aren't they? All this talk about how do we help them, those dogs that were neutered before we knew better, is obviously relevant and it's interesting, but in 5 to 10 years, it's going to be irrelevant because dogs aren't neutered anymore. I mean, really.
Can I ask about neutering bitches? Because I work dogs. My dogs pick up, and a lot of my friends have got dogs that pick up as well. And so we have like working dogs and dogs that are in kennels and they're working. And if a bitch comes into season in the middle of the shooting season, so a lot of people who've got gun dogs will neuter the bitches after they're like 3 or 4, and they've either had a litter or not had a litter, in relation to the shooting season, because if you're out there picking up, you can't take a bitch in season out with you. And then the whole, if you've got a string of bitches, then they could all end up in season through the shooting season, and then you can't, the shoot's out of action. So if they were going to go and get spayed, what would be the best way of spaying them? I know you're saying like don't do it, but is it, because there's a couple of options now still in relation to spaying. There's the keyhole, which removes the womb but leaves the ovaries. There's the
other way around.
What did I say?
Yeah, I mean,
the wrong way around.
there's different surgical options. The old-fashioned way is to remove everything. This is what I was taught back in the day. You take away the ovaries and the womb.
Big cut, take everything out.
Big cut, take everything out. Then the more modern version that is practiced in most places these days is take away the ovaries only. because the womb is completely inactive without when the hormones are gone. When there is no hormonal influence, the womb doesn't do anything. It's controlled by the ovaries.
Is that an ovarectomy or something like that?
Yes, yeah. Yes. The old-fashioned is called the ovary hysterectomy, where you take both the womb and the ovaries. The more modern version is to take just the ovaries, because that's where the action is, and the womb can just sit there and do nothing. And it makes it a smaller operation. That's the keyhole surgery, where you just do a flank incision and you fish out the ovaries. And there's a shorter recovery time and a smaller wound, and it's easier to recover from. Hormonally, they are identical. The point is that you take away the ovaries, and that's where the action is. But the ovarectomy, the flank incision, the keyhole surgery is a smaller hole, because you're only taking out the ovaries, but they're equally as neutered. And I would certainly still say that it shouldn't be an option. It really shouldn't be an option. I try to think of because it's so, I think it goes for all of us. We're conservative by nature. We accept things that are clearly crazy, but we accept them because that's just, we're conditioned that way. We're used to it. We can't see clearly. And I try to think of a metaphor or something to try and illustrate, because you do hear that, yeah, I understand neutering is harmful, but I have to. And I think, actually, no. What you're saying is, I have to risk my dog's life. And I can't think, and it sounds a bit crass, but the only metaphor I could think of was like slavery. It's like saying, okay, so now we think slavery is wrong, but the farms have to run. So clearly we have to keep some slaves, or we have to give them slightly better conditions, or we have to not make children work, or, it's kind of trying to modify and say, okay, so we need to reconsider, but the world would fall apart and the farms wouldn't work, and who would pick the cotton if we didn't have the slaves, kind of thing. It doesn't stand up. Once we know that this is unacceptable and harmful, and can lead to, and has, think of the number of dogs that have died because they were neutered, and we never knew. We missed it completely. So it's just not available to us as an option anymore, and we have to find different ways of doing things. We just have to, because we can't keep saying, yeah, but it makes things complicated. Sure. But it's the new world order, and we know better now. We can't do it. And can I just, in relation to that, say, I think it's really important also to acknowledge that we didn't know better. And I've had conversations with a lot of veterinary colleagues and with a lot of people who've lost dogs who are heartbroken, because, most vets in small animal practice will have neutered probably at least one dog a day for the whole of their career. And so you sit there with people in tears saying, this was my chosen profession because this was my identity. I have devoted my whole professional life to wanting to help animals. This is what I've done. And now it turns out that I've probably done more harm than good. That's hard that's hard. And the same thing goes for people. If you had a dog that died from cancer, you can now see that you've probably multiplied the risk of, significantly multiplied the risk of that dog getting that cancer through neutering them. So really, you killed your dog by taking them to the vet and having them neutered. But we didn't know. And it's just, it's heartbreaking and it's tragic. But we have to forgive ourselves. We do the best we can with the information that's available to us, and we have to forgive ourselves. But the other side of that is, now that we do know, we absolutely cannot continue. The thing we can do is we can talk about this, and we can make sure that no dog is neutered in 2026, because that's the heartbreaking thing now. People contact me and say, but my dog was neutered 6 months ago. No one ever told me this. And if a vet today neuters a dog just because the owner requests it without a proper conversation, that's negligence, and that should be followed up. That mustn't happen. And the British Veterinary Association in their document are saying that very clearly. We don't just automatically neuter healthy dogs anymore. We're done with that.
So now if somebody does neuter the dog and they can, like 6 months ago, they're using the scenario you've just said, so 6 months ago they neutered the dog, they have then got an option to go back and say, well, can I put my dog on Suprelorin, for example, which will hopefully mitigate the risks of...
I mean, it's not in general practice at the moment.
Okay.
What the experts, I mean, this is experimental. This is where the research is. If someone has a neutered dog that is healthy, what the experts are saying is, let's hope you got away with it. Ignore,
leave well alone. Yeah.
Leave well alone. If you have a neutered dog that's ill, this is becoming an option, but your local vet is going to look at you funny, I think, if you've got to come in and suggest that. If you have a neutered dog that's ill, what I would suggest, and you want to pursue this, you need to see a reproduction specialist, and if they can then take advice on that and see if they want to go down that route. But it's not it's not in general applied practice at the moment, but it's where the research is, and it may be relevant for this window that we're now in, where there are dogs that were neutered, but obviously, it's not going to be very long until we don't have neutered dogs anymore, and I can't wait to see what that does in terms of allergies and cancers, and maybe we've cracked it now. Maybe we're looking at dog health in being a completely different thing in 5 years.
Let's hope so.
Yeah.
But I think that has been a fascinating journey. Lots of food for thought for people, and we will try very hard not to call the podcast episode Talking Bollocks.
Oh no, I think we should.
Oh, well done. Touche.
Oh, that's been enlightening, eye-opening, really fascinating. So thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank
you for having me. It's a pleasure. It's always a pleasure.
Oh, it's been brilliant. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. It's not just gun dogs and not just guard dogs, but all things canine, as we hope you have discovered. Please like, share and subscribe, and help us spread a bit of common sense back into dog ownership. And a review wouldn't go amiss either. Catch up with Les and Ross again in about 14 days for more canine conversations. Until next time, stay well and enjoy your dogs. Any dog-related questions or topics, just drop an email to talk@cfba.uk or message us via facebook.com/gundogs and guard dogs podcast.